critically considering what makes a definition work. How we communicate and understand each other is perhaps one of the most foundational aspects of our lives. And yet, many of us don't understand the fundamentals of how this all works and how vital it is to a person's development of meaning, purpose, and knowledge in their life. Obviously, there is the field of linguistics, which delves into all of this in the technical sense. But we can also discuss these ideas from the perspective of philosophy, what is known as the philosophy of language. In this video, we will discuss the basics of definitions and their function in society through a philosophical lens, in order to help us better navigate the complex world of information and communication in our day-to-day lives. How to define a definition. A definition explains the meaning and content of a word, as it is used in a particular language. A definition distinguishes, through language, one thing in the world from another. Making definitions is the means by which humans organize their experience of reality through shared systems of language. There are two major types of definitions: concrete and abstract. Concrete definitions are things that describe other things in the real physical world. Think nouns, person, place, thing. The definition of corn, the definition of George Washington. Abstract definitions describe things within our internal and mental experience. Think concepts and principles, theories, feelings. The definition of love, or self, or knowledge. We know what a definition is now, but how does this work? To define is to separate and categorize and differentiate. It is to break the world down into understandable parts. Part of a definition's job is to exclude some things and include others. That is how a definition is created. If a definition excludes nothing, then we aren't really saying anything about anything, are we? It is through the act of including and excluding, sifting through the internal and external world, that definitions are made possible. By defining a thing A, we both include and exclude certain elements in order to make a distinction between this thing A and another thing B. That is, in order to make a definition at all, we must specify what we are including and excluding in order to create a working definition. However, there are certain technical definitions that are meant to explain these exact things that we're talking about, such as the word everything or anything, or even the concept of total. Another way to talk about how a definition does what it does is to talk about its function. The function of definitions: to organize language and the world, to orient humans, us, and to communicate, me, to you. Furthermore, definitions are social. Just like language, definitions are deeply intertwined with community. That is, one of their primary functions is to facilitate communication and understanding between multiple people. This is the social function of definitions. By using words according to their definitions, we agree and participate in the rules of language that define a word a certain way in order to clarify it from something else. Even the words I am using now, you must be operating on our shared social definition of these words in order to understand what I am saying about them. Though, definitions can also be private. Maybe in middle school or high school, you and your best friend had a secret word you used to talk about certain people. Something like referring to boys you had crushes on as Kiwis. This is creating a new definition for a pre-existing word that is only understood between certain people. It has a private understanding, but it is not a functioning definition in the larger society because only a select few use it. As we have seen, definitions have multiple functions. But here I am focusing on the social function of definitions and how they work in society in order to help people recognize a functioning from a non-functioning definition and the dangers of definitions that lose their meaning. It is important to be able to identify when a definition has lost its proper function, or is at risk of losing this function, because it affects how we write, talk to each other, relate to each other, and understand what is happening in the world. Now, this may seem like common sense, but there are good and bad definitions. When a definition doesn't serve its function to create and facilitate shared communication between different people, something needs to be adjusted. These are called fallacies of definition. One of the fallacies of definitions is called scale of effectivity. Just like many other social concepts, definitions can cease to serve their proper societal function if they become too restrictive or too loose. We need balance. When the scope of what a definition includes becomes more and more narrow and rigid, it can result in the word becoming too restrictive. If we said the definition of a house cat is a small feline mammal that has 4 legs, short or long fur, and pointy ears, what about hairless cats? Suddenly, our definition excludes a whole type of cat, so the definition needs to be adjusted. Similarly, when the scope of what a definition includes becomes too broad and flexible, it can result in the definition becoming too loose. If we define a chair as something a person can sit on, suddenly, many things that were not chairs before, like a boat or a building, or even a person's lap, have become chairs. Let's look at another example. Say we are asking the definition of an emergency plan, to which the answer is a plan in case of emergencies. This definition uses both words in question and neither explains what a plan nor an emergency is. So what are we really defining here? We are given a definition of emergency plan that doesn't really give us any details about what an actual emergency plan is. The definition relies on and circles back to the very phrase we're trying to define, without giving us any clue as to what it really is. This is an example of a fallacy of definition called circular definition, where the word being defined is self-referenced in its own definition. It can happen between multiple words too, such as a leaf is a green growth on a tree, and a tree is a large plant that has leaves. A non-circular definition, for our example above, might look something like emergency plan, a set of instructions to help one safely navigate a sudden dangerous situation, such as a natural disaster or medical crisis. Now that we are aware of these fallacies of definition, it is important to understand also why they matter to us and how they can be dangerous. You may be thinking, so what if one word becomes meaningless? It doesn't really do anything. Well, the danger with language is that it is a fragile system, where the whole thing can easily begin to fall apart if parts of it become weak and collapse. Try picking a word and repeating it out loud to yourself several times. It soon begins to sound weird, and you are more aware that this word is really just some random sound that humans make and have decided to say it means this. Let's use the common metaphor of language as planks of wood that we stand on. As we develop deeper and more complex language, the planks extend the area that is stable to stand on. All these many planks together constitute the solid ground of language and its functionality, person to person. But think of what would happen if one plank were to become useless or unstable. If, say, we take the new definition of emergency plan above and it becomes useless, suddenly that plank falls from beneath our feet, leaving a blank space. But that plank was connected to other planks, which are now weaker to step on because these other words, or planks, lack a concept that they relied on before to make them more meaningful. If we don't know what an emergency plan is, how do we talk about emergencies? Or how will we know when to take the emergency exit in a building if we don't know what an emergency is and what's not? When one word loses its social function, it has a ripple effect on closely connected words and concepts that are each important in their own way to how we interact with and understand each other. This is called a breakdown of language, and it is a very dangerous thing which can spread to more and more words and concepts, to the point of the whole system of language, or a part of it, collapsing. Once we try to operate on this definition of emergency plan, what is there to keep other words from getting that same kind of useless definition applied to them? Like a disease, the linguistic fallacies of definition have the potential to spread, and the more words these affect, the larger and more dangerous the problem becomes. Now, this is different from words naturally adapting to the needs or uses of a society as time passes. Remember, definitions lose function when they are too loose or too rigid. There needs to be a balance between flexibility and stability. This is why it is extremely important for us to understand what a definition is, what makes a definition strong or weak, and how a definition functions in society, as well as how to identify linguistic fallacies of definition, so that we don't fall into the trap of these fallacies. We have to work together to make definitions stronger and more meaningful instead of undermine our own language system and fall into irrational and illogical ideas based on faulty definitions. By understanding the basics of the philosophy of language, you can now pay more attention to the words you are using and how they are used. You can use these ideas to identify dangerous or useless linguistic fallacies in social media, ads, or even when discussing with others. The goal is to use this knowledge to help strengthen our language and our concepts, and to enrich conversation and connection between people, not to belittle or undermine each other, but to better engage in more meaningful and creative conversation in day-to-day life.